Psalm 6 is a cry from someone overwhelmed by weakness, sorrow, and opposition, yet it moves steadily toward confidence and rest. The psalm begins with distress, but ends with assurance, showing the journey from fear into peace. David does not approach God as someone trying to earn acceptance through performance. He appeals to mercy. That alone reveals the foundation of the relationship. He knows that restoration does not come from human worthiness, but from the compassion and covenant faithfulness of God. When David asks not to be rebuked in anger, he is expressing the weight of conviction and suffering. He feels crushed inwardly and outwardly, yet even in his anguish, he turns toward God instead of away from him. The cry for healing is not merely physical. His soul is troubled. This reveals how deeply suffering affects the whole person. The psalm paints a picture of humanity unable to rescue itself and completely dependent upon divine kindness. The plea, "How long?" captures the tension experienced by those waiting for deliverance. In the Old Covenant world, many promises still pointed ahead toward fulfillment. The faithful looked forward to the day when death, separation, and judgment would finally be overcome. David's longing anticipates the greater redemption that would later be revealed through Christ. The answer to the sorrow of Psalm 6 is ultimately found in the finished work that brings reconciliation, peace, and access to God without fear. David's statement about death and the grave reflects the shadow that existed before the fullness of resurrection hope was unveiled. The ancient world often viewed the grave as silence and separation from the active praise of God among the living. Yet later revelation brings clarity that life and immortality are fully illuminated through Christ. Because of this, believers now read Psalm 6 with the understanding that death itself has been defeated and no longer stands as a barrier between God and his people. The description of tears, weariness, and sleepless nights shows the crushing power of accusation and despair. David feels surrounded by enemies and exhausted by grief. These enemies can certainly be literal adversaries, but they also represent every force that condemns, accuses, and seeks to destroy peace. The human conscience under guilt becomes restless and tormented. Yet the turning point of the psalm comes when David becomes confident that God has heard him. "The Lord has heard the voice of my weeping" changes the entire tone of the passage. Nothing outward may have changed yet, but inwardly assurance has arrived. The confidence is not rooted in David's ability to make himself righteous. It rests in the certainty that God receives and answers. This points forward to the complete acceptance believers have through Christ, where access to God is based on grace rather than religious achievement. The closing verses declare that the enemies will retreat in shame. This can be understood not only as victory over earthly opposition, but also as the defeat of every accusing power. Condemnation loses its authority where forgiveness and reconciliation have been established. The triumph is not human self-victory, but confidence in what God has accomplished. From the perspective of covenant fulfillment, Psalm 6 also reflects the transition from the fading age of fear and judgment into the completed reality of redemption. The anxieties connected with covenant wrath, separation, and looming destruction belonged to an age moving toward its conclusion. In Christ, the old order reached its fulfillment and removal, establishing a new covenant reality defined by peace, righteousness, and direct access to God. Because of this, believers are invited to live not in dread, but in confidence and rest. Psalm 6 therefore becomes more than a lament. It is a testimony that sorrow does not have the final word. Mercy triumphs over fear, grace over accusation, and divine acceptance over human weakness. The psalm begins with trembling, but ends with assurance because God hears, restores, and gives peace to those who call upon him.